This would be Monday, May 9th, advanced class. We're going to finish out chapter 1 here shortly. Figured out with class earlier, this is why I'm having to bump back your rough draft. We'll finish the intro here in just a moment. It won't take long. But there is a part in chapter 1 that I want to get to before I have you guys start reading on your own, and we're not going to get a chance to get to it today. And so it is one of my 3 favorite parts of the book, and it is definitely one I want to get to before you start reading on your own, which means that I'm going to read tomorrow too, for at least part of it, and then let you guys take off on your own. And so if I'm reading tomorrow, that bumped things back a day. So I planned on still having you guys do it, but it didn't work out that way. Curse the fact that I read. Anyway, so now you're going to have your rough draft come due on Wednesday, and then same thing with the quiz, which will be over chapters 1 through 4. Mr. Brovicast, we're starting chapter 1 today. Correct. And when we get into it, you're going to find out that chapter 4 is all of 1 page. Chapter 2 is all of 4 pages. So really, you're going to be reading like all of chapter 3, which is 10 pages. So I have full faith in your ability to be able to do it. Because you'll find out as we get into it that there's some issues. And then later this week, more reading, Charger Challenge. Good to go from there. There is my Charger Challenge list for those people who are going to be going and challenging Chargers. Some of you guys are Chargers and you're challenging already. Download the ebook version, so if you forget the paper version at school, you'll still have a copy that you can use. The page numbers are not going to match up because it's an ebook. Alright, and then today.
What page are we on?
I'm getting ready to tell you. Oh. We stopped on page 0250.
Where?
At the very bottom, that last one where it says, it took 2. And he's talking about heading back home. And we'll finish out as quickly as we can to get there. Alright. So we've got Sandy Sterling, and now he's heading back home, and yes. Conferences dragged. Producers got inspirations that had to be carefully shot down. Directors needed their egos soothed. Anyway, I was longer than anticipated in sunny California. Finally, though, I was allowed to return to the care and safety of the family. So, I quick buzzed to L.A. You have a question? What?
25.
Are you on the paper version or the ebook version? I have no idea. It's in the introduction.
We already read this.
What?
Yeah, your page is behind.
I am?
We should just
right.
we already modeled off to his room, so Angelica just is getting so it's right up Angelica.
Angelica?
Angelica's just getting dinner on.
Oh. I must have moved the wrong page number. Thank you. So we're on page 26. Look at that. We already read a whole page. Page 26. I have no idea what that is on ebook things. It's like page squirrel. Angelica? Helen put her finger to her lips and whispered, it's her 3rd day on.
That's not where we are.
We've already read
It's Angelica's just getting dinner on. That is where we are.
Where? It says
Is that page 26?
You found it?
Yes.
Where?
It's like the second paragraph, like towards the bottom of it.
No, we've already read that.
Yeah, I don't start in the middle of a paragraph, child. That's ridiculous. That's why I jumped out.
But we've already read that.
Angelica. Helen put her finger to her lips and whispered, it's her 3rd day. Good job. But I think she may be a treasure, unlike many children in this class. I whispered back.
You make me tired.
I feel the same way. What was wrong with the treasure we had when I left? She'd only been with us a week then.
Oh, never mind. We're not
Yeah,
there.
exactly. She proved a disappointment.
No, we already read this. I was saying I picked the wrong spot too. Don't.
This is where my bookmark was before.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right, you're wrong. Lies.
Stop. Let's just read.
That's what I thought too. Helen is this brilliant lady. Junior Phi Beta in college, every academic honor conceivable, really an intellect of startling breadth and accomplishment. Only she can't keep a maid. First, I guess she feels guilty having anybody, since most of the anybodies available nowadays are black or Spanish, and Helen is ultra super liberal. Second, she's so efficient, she scares them. She can do everything better than they can, and she knows it. And she knows they know it. Third, once she's got them panicked, she tries to explain, being an analyst, why they shouldn't be frightened. And after a good, solid half-hour ego search with Helen, they're really frightened. Anyway, we've had an average of 4 treasures a year for the last few years. We've been running in bad luck, but it'll change, I said, just as reassuringly as I knew how. I used to heckle her about the help problem, but I learned that was not necessarily wise. Dinner was ready a little later, and with an arm around my wife and an arm around my son, I advanced toward the dining room. I felt, at that moment, safe, secure, all the nice things. Supper was on the table. Creamed spinach, mashed potatoes, gravy, pot roast. It's terrific, except I don't like pot roast, since I'm a rare meat man. But creamed spinach I've a lech for. So, all in all, a more than edible spread was set across the tablecloth. We sat. Helen served the meat. The rest we passed. My pot roast slice was not terribly moist, but the gravy could compensate. Helen rang. Angelica appeared. Maybe 20 or 18, swarthy, slow-moving. Angelica, Helen began. This is Mr. Goldman. I smiled and said, hi, waved a fork. She nodded back. Angelica, this is not meant to be construed as criticism, since what happened is all my fault. But in the future, we must both try very hard to remember that Mr. Goldman likes his roast beef rare. This was roast beef? I said. Helen shot me a look. Now, Angelica, there's no problem, and I should have told you more than once about Mr. Goldman's preferences. But next time we have boned rib roast, let's all do our best to make the middle pink. Shall we? Angelica backed into the kitchen. Another treasure down the tubes. Remember now, we all three started this meal happy. 2 of us are left in that state. Helen clearly being distraught. Jason was piling the mashed potatoes on his plate with a practiced and steady motion. I smiled at my kid. Hey, let's go a little easy, huh, fella? He splatted another fat spoonful onto his plate. Jason, they're just loaded. I'm really hungry, Dad, he said, not looking at me. Fill up on the meat then, why don't you? Eat all the meat you want. I won't say a word. Well, I'm not eating nothing, Jason said, and he shoved his plate away, folded his arms, and stared off into space. If I were a furniture salesperson, Helen said to me, or perhaps a teller in a bank, I could understand. But how can you have spent all these years married to a psychiatrist and talk like that? You're out of the dark ages, Willie. Helen, the boy is overweight. All I suggested was he might leave a few potatoes for the rest of the world and stuff on this lovely prime pot roast your treasure has whipped up for my triumphant return. Willie, I don't want to shock you, but Jason happens to have not only a very fine mind, but also exceptionally keen eyesight. When he looks at himself in the mirror, I assure you he knows he is not slender. That is because he does not choose at this stage to be slender. He's not that far from dating, Helen. What then? Jason is 10, darling, and not interested in this stage in girls. At this stage, he is interested in rocketry. And what difference does a slight case of overweight make to a rocket lover? When he chooses to be slender, I assure you, he has both the intelligence and the willpower to become slender. Until that time, please, in my presence, do not frustrate the child. Sandy Sterling, in her bikini, was dancing behind my eyes. I'm not eating, and that's it, Jason said then. Sweet child, Helen said to the kid, in that tone she reserves on this earth only for such moments. Be logical. If you do not eat your potatoes, you will be upset, and I will be upset. Your father clearly is already upset. But if you do eat your potatoes, I shall be pleased. You will be pleased. Your tummy will be pleased. We can do nothing about your father. You have it in your power to upset all or one, about whom, as I've already said, we can do nothing. Therefore, the conclusion should be clear. But I have faith in your ability to reach it yourself. Do what you will, Jason. He began to stuff it in. You're making a poof out of that kid, I said. Only not loud enough for anybody but me and Sandy to hear. Then I took a deep, deep breath. Because whenever I come home, there's always trouble. Which is because, Helen says, I bring tension with me. I always need inhuman proof that I've been missed, that I'm still needed, loved, etc. All I know is I hate being away from home. I hate being away, but coming home is the worst. There's never really much chance to go into, well, what's new since I'm gone, chit-chat, seeing that Helen and I talk every night anyway. I'll bet you're a whiz on that bike, I said then. Maybe we'll go for a ride this weekend. Jason looked up from his potatoes. I really love the book, Dan. It was great. I was surprised that he said it because naturally I was just starting to work my way into that subject matter. But then, as Helen's always saying, Jason ain't no dummy. Well, I'm glad. And was I ever? Jason nodded. Maybe it's even the best I read in all my life. I nibbled away at my spinach. What was your favorite part? Chapter 1, the bride, Jason said. That really surprised me. I mean, not that chapter 1 stinks or anything. Actually, that's one of the 3 best parts of the whole book in it. But there's not much that goes on compared to the incredible stuff later. Buttercup grows up, mostly, is all. How about the climb up the cliffs of insanity? I said then. That's in chapter 5. Oh, great, Jason said. And that description of Prince Humperdinck's Zoo of Death? That's in the 2nd chapter. Even greater, Jason said. Anyway, anytime you tell a teacher your favorite part of the book was the 1st chapter, what is the first thing the teacher's going to assume?
You lied.
Yeah, you did not read the book whatsoever. What knocked me out about it, I said, was that this very short little passage on the Zoo of Death, and yet somehow you just know it's going to figure in later. Did you get that same feeling? Yeah, Jason nodded. Great. And by then, I knew he hadn't read it. He tried to read it, Helen cut in. He did read the 1st chapter. Chapter 2 was impossible for him. So when he'd made a sufficient and reasonable attempt, I told him to stop. Different people have different tastes. I told him he'd understand, Willie. Of course I understood. I felt just so deserted, though. I didn't like it, Dad. I wanted to. I smiled at him. How could he not like it? Passion, duels, miracles, giants, true love. You're not eating the spinach either? Mama said. I got up. Time change. I'm not hungry. She didn't say anything until she heard me open the front door. Where are you going? She called in. If I'd known, I would have answered. I wandered through December. No topcoat. I wasn't aware of being cold, though. All I knew was I was 40 years old, and I didn't mean to be here when I was 40. Locked with this genius shrink wife and this balloon son. It must have been 9 o'clock when I was sitting in the middle of Central Park, alone, no one near me, no other bench occupied. That was when I heard the rustling in the bushes. It stopped. Then again, very soft, even nearer. I whirled, screaming, "Don't you bug me!" And whatever it was, friend, foe, imagination, fled. I could hear the running and realize something. Right then, at that moment, I was dangerous. Then it got cold. I went home, and Helen was going over some notes in bed. Ordinarily, she would come out with something about me being a bit elderly for acts of juvenile behavior. But there must have been danger clinging to me still. I could see it in her smart eyes. He did try, she said finally. I never thought he didn't. Where's the book? The library, I think. I turned, started out. Can I get you anything? I said no, then went to the library, closed myself in, hunted out The Princess Bride. It was in pretty good shape, I realized as I checked the binding, which is when I saw it was published by my publishing house, Harcourt Brace Jovanovich. This was before that. They weren't even Harcourt Brace and World yet, just plain old Harcourt Brace, period. I flicked to the title page, which is funny since I'd never done that before. It was always my father who'd done the handling. I had to laugh when I saw the real title, because right there it said, The Princess Bride, S. Morgenstern's classic tale of true love and high adventure. You had to admire a guy who called his own new book a classic before it was published, and anyone else had a chance to read it. Maybe he figured if he didn't do it, nobody would. Or maybe he was just trying to give the reviewers a helping hand. I don't know. I skimmed the 1st chapter. It was pretty much exactly as I remembered. Then I turned to the 2nd chapter, the one about Prince Humperdinck and the little kind of tantalizing description of the Zoo of Death. And that's when I began to realize the problem. Not that the description wasn't there. It was, and again, pretty much as I remembered it. But before you got to it, there were maybe 60 pages of text dealing with Prince Humperdinck's ancestry, how his family got control of Florin, and this wedding, and that, and somebody else. And then I skipped to, child beheading this one over here, who then married somebody else, and then I skipped to the 3rd chapter, the courtship, and that was all about the history of Gilder and how that country reached its place in the world. The more I flipped on, the more I knew. Morgenstern wasn't writing any children's book. He was writing a kind of satiric history of his country and the decline of the monarchy in Western civilization. But my father only read me the action stuff, the good parts. He never bothered with the serious side at all. About 2 in the morning, I called Hiram in Martha's Vineyard. Hiram Hayden's been my editor for a dozen years, ever since The Soldier in the Rain. And we've been through a lot together, but never any phone calls at 2 in the morning. To this day, I know he doesn't understand why I couldn't wait till maybe breakfast. "You're sure you're all right, Bill?" he kept saying. "Hey, Hiram," I began after about 6 rings. "Listen, you guys published a book just after World War I. Do you think it might be a good idea for me to abridge it and republish it now?" "You're sure you're all right, Bill?" "Fine, absolutely. And see, I'd just use the good parts. I'd kind of bridge where there are skips in the narrative and leave the good parts alone. What do you think?" "Bill, it's 2 in the morning up here. Are you still in California?" I acted like I was all shocked and surprised, so he wouldn't think I was a nut. I'm sorry, Hiram. My God, what an idiot. It's only 11 o'clock in Beverly Hills. Do you think you could ask Mr. Ivanovich, though?" "You mean now?" "Tomorrow or the next day. No big deal. I'll ask him anything, only I'm not quite sure what I'm getting an accurate reading on exactly what you want." "You sure you're all right, Bill?" "I'll be in New York tomorrow. I'll call you then about the specifics, okay?" "Could you make it a little earlier in the business day, Bill?" I laughed, and we hung up, and I called Zig in California. Everett Ziegler's been my movie agent for maybe 8 years. He did the Butch Cassidy deal for me, and I woke him up, too. "Hey, Zig, could you get me a postponement on the Stepford Wives? There's this other thing that's come up." "You're contracted to start now." "How long a postponement?" "I can't say for sure. I've never done an abridgment before. Just tell me what you think they do." "I think if it's a long postponement, they threaten to sue and you'd end up losing the job." Came out pretty much as he said. They threatened to sue, and I almost lost the job and some money and didn't make any friends in the industry, as those of us in showbiz call movies. But the abridgment got done, and you hold it in your hands. The good parts version. Okay, why did I go through all that? Helen pressured me greatly to think about an answer. She felt it was important. Not that she knows necessarily, but that I know. "Because you acted crackers, Willie boy. You had me truly scared." "So why?" "I never was worth beans at self-scrutiny. Everything I write is impulse. This feels right, that sounds wrong, like that. I can't analyze, not my own actions anyway. I know I don't expect this to change anybody else's life the way it altered mine. But take the title words, True Love and High Adventure. I believed in that once. I thought my life was going to follow that path. Prayed that it would. Obviously it didn't, but I don't think there's high adventure left anymore. Nobody takes out a sword nowadays and cries, 'Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.' And true love you can forget about, too. I don't know if I love anything truly anymore beyond the porterhouse at Peter Luger's and the cheese enchilada at El Parador's. Sorry about that, Helen. Anyway, here's the good parts version. S. Morgenstern wrote it, my father read it to me, and now I give it to you. What you do with it will be of more than passing interest to us all." Okay. Not only does that intro give you the background on it, which I could skip if that's all it was. I could care less about it. The problem is he chops out huge portions of this book. The original S. Morgenstern's over 1,000 pages. This one's 300. And so there's these huge chunks that he's cut out, and he explains these chunks. As we go through the book, there'll be these parts where the novel stops, and then William Goldman comes in and talks, and explains different parts that get cut out, and why he cut them, and stuff like that. And if you've not read the intro, it gets confusing. You're like, who's this random person who suddenly talked? So that's why we had to do the intro, to make it less confusing later. Yeah, yes.
Can you still find the original version?
It's hard. We'll talk about that coming up. It's not really, because no one wants to read it, so it's really old. It's like those old copies of Dickens kind of thing. Because every time someone wants to get a book, they want the short version, not the old, not so interesting version. People don't like old and uninteresting.
I do.
Bailey.
So is the guy that was just talking for those 30 pages supposed to be the old grandpa dude in the movie?
The equivalent of.
Yes, wait.
Or was it?
No.
No.
He's supposed to be the kid in the movie.
Yeah.
The grandpa is supposed to be his dad.
So the dude that just was talking for 30 pages is the little kid?
Yes. And then his dad, who died and said
Right.
8 fingers. That were 8 languages. That's supposed to be the grandpa person.
Oh, is this guy dead who wrote this?
No, he's still alive. He's old. I mean, like even
Yeah,
older than
he
me.
said
Old.
1972.
Yeah, he's like in his 80s or something like that. So I mean, I know old people useless. All right. Now we get to the next issue, which is I mentioned before that the whole Shrek and Hoodwinked, how it's a satire.
Oh yeah.
As we get into the actual book, here's where we get to the actual satire, where he's making fun of stuff. It begins with Buttercup, who is this beautiful princess, and it talks about who's a person way back in the day, but this is sort of the fictionalized portion of her life.
Yes.
But it's going to talk about her rising up from being, number 50 most beautiful person up to the number 1 most beautiful person. So it starts off talking about like this person used to be the most beautiful person until she dropped off the ranking. And so it gets confusing. Just roll with it. Or tell.
Speaking of rolling with it,
Yes.
one of the parts that I hate the most about the movie is when Wesley is falling down the hill. And he's like, as you wish. And she was like,
No, not talking about the movie. Good stuff. All right.
no. And she's like, oh,
Still-
and then she throws herself down the hill
not
instead of running down the
Still
hill.
not talking about the movie. It's okay, because that, things happen.
You don't read it. It doesn't matter. It's not.
I agree. Not mattering part.
Yeah.
Yeah, just
No.
go ahead and quit now. They're not even real people. You just made it up.
Yeah. But it's okay because they all die anyway.
They're all dead. The bomb goes off. They haven't been nuclear weapons.
Yep.
The year that Buttercup was born, the most beautiful woman in the world was a French scullery maid named Annette. Annette worked in Paris for the Duke and Duchess de Guiche, and it did not escape the Duke's notice that someone extraordinary was polishing the pewter. The Duke's notice did not escape the notice of the Duchess either, who was not very beautiful and not very rich, but plenty smart. The Duchess set about studying Annette and shortly found her adversary's tragic flaw: chocolate. Armed now, the Duchess set to work. The Palace de Guiche turned into a candy castle. Everywhere you looked, bonbons. There were piles of chocolate-covered mints in the drawing rooms, baskets of chocolate-covered nougats in the parlors. Annette never had a chance. Inside of a season, she went from delicate to whopping, and the Duke never glanced in her direction without sad bewilderment clouding his eyes. Annette, it might be noted, seemed only cheerier throughout her enlargement. She eventually married the pastry chef, and they both ate a lot until old age claimed them. Things, it might also be noted, did not fare so cheerily for the Duchess. The Duke, for reasons passing understanding, next became smitten with his very own mother-in-law, which caused the Duchess ulcers. Only they didn't have ulcers yet. Alright, more precisely, ulcers existed, people had them, but they weren't called ulcers. The medical profession at that time called them stomach pains, and felt the best cure was coffee, dolled with brandy twice a day until the pain subsided. The Duchess took her mixture faithfully, watching through the years as her husband and her mother blew kisses at each other behind her back. Not surprisingly, the Duchess's grumpiness became legendary, as Voltaire has so aptly chronicled, except this was before Voltaire. Voltaire's an old French author.
This is so funny.
All of that has nothing to do with the story. Basically just telling you that when Buttercup was born, the number 1 most beautiful girl was this one chick, and someone else made her fat. And then we're going to jump, as she goes farther, we're going to find the next person, and so on. The year Buttercup turned 10, the most beautiful woman lived in Bengal, the daughter of a successful tea merchant. The girl's name was Eleuthera, and her skin was of a dusky perfection unseen in India for 80 years. There have only been 11 perfect complexions in all of India since accurate accounting began. There is no accurate accounting of that, that's just completely made up. Eleuthera was 19 the year the pox plague hit Bengal. The girl survived, even if her skin did not. When Buttercup was 15, Adela Terrell of Sussex on the Thames was easily the most beautiful creature. Adela was 20, and so far did she outdistance the world that it seemed certain she'd be the most beautiful for many, many years. But then one day, one of her suitors, she had 104 of them. Do you guys know what a suitor is?
Nope.
Oh, servant?
No. It is a boy who thinks you're a hottie, who gives you flirties all the time. That is a suitor. Usually because they're trying to get your hand in marriage. Basically, dudes that flirt with you. So she had 104 flirty dudes lined up with her. Exclaimed that without question, Adela must be the most ideal item yet spawned. Adela, flattered, began to ponder on the truth of the statement. That night, alone in her room, she examined herself pore by pore in her mirror. This was after mirrors. It took her until close to dawn to finish her inspection. But by that time, it was clear to her that the young man had been quite correct in his assessment. She was, through no real faults of her own, perfect. As she strolled through the family rose gardens, watching the sunrise, she felt happier than she'd ever been. Not only am I perfect, she said to herself, I'm probably the first perfect person in the whole long history of the universe. Not a part of me could stand improving. How lucky I am to be perfect and rich and sought after and sensitive and young and... Young? The mist was rising around her as Adela began to think. Well, of course I'll always be sensitive, she thought, and I'll always be rich, but I don't quite see how I'm going to manage to always be young. And when I'm not young, how am I going to stay perfect? And if I'm not perfect, what else is there? What indeed? Adela furrowed her brow in desperate thought. You know what it means to furrow your brow?
Yeah.
It goes, you little thinky things, and it all comes together, gets all wrinkly. That's called furrowing your brow. And so she's furrowing her brow. Furrowed her brow in desperate thought. But it was the first time in her entire life her brow had ever had to furrow, and Adela gasped when she realized what she had done. Horrified that she'd somehow damaged it, perhaps permanently, she rushed back to her mirror and spent the morning, and although she managed to convince herself that she was still quite as perfect as ever, there was no question she was not quite as happy as she had been. She had begun to fret. Excuse me. The first worry lines appeared within a fortnight. The first wrinkles within a month. Before the year was out, creases abounded. She married soon thereafter the self-same man who accused her of sublimity, and she gave him merry hell for many years. Buttercup, of course, at 15, knew none of this, and if she had, would have found it totally unfathomable. How could someone care if she were the most beautiful woman in the world or not? What difference could it have made if you were only the third most beautiful, or the sixth? Buttercup at this time was nowhere near that high, being barely in the top 20, and that primarily on potential, certainly not on any particular care she took of herself. She hated to wash her face. She loathed the area behind her ears. She was sick of combing her hair, and did so as little as possible. What she liked to do, preferred above all else really, was to ride her horse and taunt the farm boy. The horse's name was Horse. Buttercup was never long on imagination, and it came when she called it, went where she steered it, did what she told it. The farm boy did what she told him too. Actually, he was more a young man now, but he'd been a farm boy, who had orphaned, and he had come to work for her father, and Buttercup referred to him that way still. Farm boy, fetch me this. Get me that, farm boy, quickly, lazy thing. Trot now, or I'll tell father. As you wish. That was all he ever answered. As you wish. Fetch that, farm boy. As you wish. Try this, farm boy. As you wish. He lived in a hovel out near the animals, and according to Buttercup's mother, he kept it clean. He even read when he had candles. I'll leave the lad an acre in my will, Buttercup's father was fond of saying. They had acres then. You'll spoil him, Buttercup's mother always answered. He's slaved for many years. Hard work should be rewarded. Then rather than continue the argument, they had arguments then too, they would both turn on their daughter. You didn't bathe, her father said. I did. Not with water, her father continued. You reek like a stallion. I've been riding all day. You must bathe, Buttercup, her mother joined in. The boys don't like their girls to smell of stables. Oh, the boys! Buttercup fairly exploded. I do not care about the boys. Horse loves me, that's quite sufficient. Thank you. She said that speech loud, and she said it often. But like it or not, things were beginning to happen. Shortly before her 16th birthday, Buttercup realized it had now been more than a month since any girl in the village had spoken to her. She'd never been much close to the girls, so the change was nothing sharp, but at least before there were head nods exchanged when she rode through the village or along the cart tracks. But now, for no reason, there was nothing. A quick glance away as she approached. That was all. Buttercup cornered Cornelia one morning at the blacksmith's and asked about the silence. I should think, after what you've done, you'd have the courtesy not to pretend to ask, came from Cornelia. Then what have I done? What? What? You've stolen them! With that, Cornelia fled. But Buttercup understood. She knew who them was. The boys. The village boys. The beef-witted, feather-brained, rattle-skulled, clod-pated, dim-domed, noodle-noggin, sap-hundred, lock-knobbed boys! And there we'll stop. Tomorrow, I finally get to the good part of the book. And I'm excited, which is why I'm not letting you read ahead yet.
Oh, we're collecting.
Nope, you get to keep the book, but don't read ahead because we're going to read tomorrow and it's going to make you grumpy. So you're going to have to just survive one more day.
Aim in it. Like you could stop.
Just work on the book report if you haven't yet. We'll do that Wednesday. Take off!